The New York State Department of Transportation presents the DOT POD.
And welcome into the DOT POD. I'm Josh Heller.
And I'm Anya Cardos.
And we are delighted to have you joining us. Well, when it's springtime, as it is now, and you hear the words pollen, probably the first thing you think of, first thing I think of is
itchy eyes.
Itchy eyes, runny nose, scratchy throat, allergies. Brutal, right? We could do without them.
That's true.
And yet pollen is not something we could do without. Nor could we do without those who move that pollen around, a.k.a. the pollinators. And that's what we're going to talk about today, Anya. We're going to talk about the importance of pollinators and what we're doing about it.
Yeah, what would we do without them? We wouldn't have apples. We wouldn't have tequila, coffee.
Your priority list is tremendous. I like that.
Right,
This
up
is
at the top, right?
That's what's going through.
Right?
Absolutely.
And our lives wouldn't be as sweet with honey.
They
right?
would not be.
We're going to
They
talk about
certainly
that in a
would
second.
not be. And we're going to be joined by a couple members of our DOT family. Mary Ellen Papin is joining us, Peter Dunleavy. So thank you both for joining us today as we look ahead towards Pollinator Week coming up this month. And thanks, guys, for coming down, for sitting down with us.
Hey, guys.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get some introductions out of there. Peter, we'll start with you. Tell us your position here with DOT, what it is you do, and how you got here.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Dunleavy. I'm the director of the Landscape Architecture Bureau in the Office of Environment at New York State DOT. And I've been in the field of landscape architecture for, you don't really want to know, but
we want to know.
45, 46 years or so. And I grew up in New York City in a very urban area, right in Manhattan, and I look back on growing up in New York City, and I realized that the most important thing that I had in where I grew up were parks and nature, that as a relief from the city. So I just went crazy, and I went into the field of landscape architecture. That's how I've come to really align myself with lots of natural restoration, use of native plants and things like that, and pollinator efforts that have been ramping up over the years, and the interest in it really just suits my interests. So I'm kind of happy to be working with all the great people in DOT that are involved in all these efforts, and it's just a pleasure to see it all kind of blossoming. Pardon the pun.
I like it. I like it. We'll talk more about those specific plants. And Mary Ellen, tell us about yourself.
I've been working with the department for a little over 30 years. Most of my career, I worked in the Rochester region. I started as an environmental specialist in design, but worked most of it in maintenance. And for just over the last year, I've been working with the main office as the maintenance environmental program manager. I am not a New York City kid. I am an upstate kid who grew up on the outskirts of suburbia on the edge of the country.
And you really like the outdoors, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment because you brought us a really special treat, and we're going to talk about that and your hobby in just a moment. But first, let's go into what is a pollinator? What is that for people that don't know? Who are pollinators out there?
A wide variety of creatures that can be, mostly people think of butterflies, but they can be butterflies, they can be flies, they can be bats, birds, anything that can carry seeds, pollen from one plant to another. And plants are very ingenious in making sure that they get that pollen out there to attach to whatever creatures can carry them. And they can be, like I grow pawpaw trees at home, and they're pollinated by flies, exclusively by flies. And bees, of course, as everyone knows, are critical to everything that we eat. We wouldn't have everything. We wouldn't survive without pollinators.
I do have some fun statistics. This is from pollinator.com, so it's It's legit. It's pollinator.org. I beg your pardon. Pollinator.org. But about 75% of all flowering plant species need the help of animals to move their heavy pollen grains from plant to plant for fertilization. Includes about 1,000 different species of vertebrates, such as birds, bats, and small mammals. Peter, like you mentioned, about 200,000 species of insects, flies, beetles, wasps, ants, butterflies, moths, bees, etc., etc. So, I mean, we're talking humongous, economic and just ecosystem changing facts. So estimated 1/3 of all food and beverages is delivered by pollinators. And in the U.S., pollination produces nearly $20 billion worth of products annually. It's big business. Big business. We think, it's just bees. It's no big deal. It's big business with pollinators. And Mary Ellen, I'll throw this to you. We're talking about pollinators, and it's Pollinator Week because they're under attack quite a bit from all sorts of different sources and different means. But a lot of pollinators, from the butterflies to those bees, they're not going to say in trouble, but they need our help.
Insect numbers in general have been in great decline. Different species to different extents. Many of those insects are pollinators, and they are under duress. They're critical to the food web. Without those pollinators and other insects in the environment, all of the creatures that are further up the food chain that eat those are also in peril and in jeopardy. So this is a serious issue.
So let's talk about what the Department of Transportation is doing to protect these pollinators. What are some of the things that are being implemented right now and being looked at as ways that we can help protect our pollinators?
Well, efforts have been ongoing. I think this is an issue that maybe the department hasn't talked a lot about in the past. And it seems like maybe with last year or so, we've been starting to talk about it more, which is a very positive thing, I think, both internally and externally. But there have been some ad hoc efforts going on in different regions for quite a while. Back in 2008, the department really pulled in the extent to which we mow. And there were many reasons for doing that, basically energy conservation and other things. But after a few years of that, we noticed natural wildflower regeneration was going on in the right-of-way where we weren't mowing as much. That led to some pilot projects out in the region. How can we tweak our mowing or do things along that lines to support this natural regeneration? We own a lot of right-of-way. And if that can be used for benefit while still being worked into our program and in a way that our maintenance forces can handle it, we thought that would be a big positive. And the support for that was pretty widespread. We didn't have to sell too hard to start to get traction.
It's funny. I remember almost a year ago, a little over a year ago, was my first day. It was my first day at DOT, and I was asked to put some stuff together for DOTs and right-of-ways involving pollinators. And I remember sitting at my desk, first day on the job here, and thinking to myself, the heck does the Department of Transportation have to do with pollinators? And I sat there and stared at a blank screen for some time, thinking to myself, like, I have no idea where to even start with this. And I think, for a lot of people who aren't necessarily in and around this, like you said, we've been starting to talk about it a little bit more as of last year and a little bit before that. But I do think that it's, we don't really think about, those right-of-ways, all that grass and plant land, all that flora that's on, DOT property that we control is, places that are crucial to the ecosystem, and that there is a huge connection between pollinators and the Department of Transportation, even if at first blush from someone who maybe is on the outside looking in, wouldn't necessarily think so.
Absolutely. When I came to work at the department, I was thinking the same thing myself. I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? I'm a landscape architect. What am I going to do? It's weeds and seeds was what the joke was. That's all you do. It's so much more than that, though, because like they say, the devil's in the details. What are those weeds and seeds that you're dealing with? And when you control the invasives, which are the weeds, you're also fostering many times the native populations, and there's been a revolution in thinking over the last few decades, since really going back all the way to Earth Day in 1970, I would say, about the need to really emphasize native plants and to foster them. And so I think that all of our landscape architects, for instance, when specifying seed mixes, instead of of bluegrass and things like that we used to do, and everything was mowed, and it was exotic grasses and things like that. People are thinking of wildflower mixes and native grasses and the beauty of those, and it requires education of the public too, to accept the appearance of those landscapes, meadow landscapes. A lot of times they would look on the roadside as if they're overgrown.
Unkempt, yeah.
Unkempt. But so there's a lot of public outreach, and the public has come to accept that. And it's not a funny thing anymore to say, hey, we're doing a pollinator garden, or wildflowers are growing here, we're not mowing. But if you go back, say, 20 years, people would say, mow that down. Nobody's taking care of your landscape. Yeah. So the society is at a point where they're ready to accept it.
And I think there's a give and take in it also, because we can't just not mow an area there's a safety aspect to it, especially along paths and things like that with, ticks. You have to, there has to be some give and take. It can't just be, all right, we planted it and now, let it happen. Nature's going to happen. It'll do what it does. We still have to have a modicum of control over it, but it's, and that's what I found so interesting about some of these studies that are going on. Maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's once every other year, maybe it's mowing it in a different way or in a different pattern or at different times so that it doesn't interfere with, the bigger pollination time. So maybe it's later on in the season, because it still needs to be done. There's still work that has to be done, but it can be done in such a way that it is, these forces don't have to fight each other.
We definitely have to consider safety on all this. We have to keep that first pass right along the edge of the highway. We've got to get that cleared more often and cut several times a year, because that serves sight distance purposes. We have to keep vegetation off of the guide rail to keep that guide rail functioning properly. We also have to keep drainage clear. But as we get further out, we do have more options. And like you said, we can maybe either tweak the timing or maybe mow some areas once every other year instead of every year. There's a lot of different things we can try to do. It's going to be a lift to fit this in with our other work and to make it work that we can do, because primarily we're a transportation agency, but we can do these things too if we do them smart and pick our spots. So that's what we're working on doing. This is going to be an ongoing thing. It's going to take a long time, but we're starting to make strides, building little by little, and we're getting to a point where this is picking up pace, so to speak.
And what kind of plants are you using to lure in these pollinators? What kind of native plants? Like I saw milkweed. Josh was talking about studies that have been done. What are you using right now to kind of get them into the areas that we need them?
I think that's kind of a two-part type of thing.
Okay.
Where we're tweaking our mowing, we're not necessarily using anything in that we're not going out there and purposely planting. We're trying to modify our mowing so that it aids the natural regeneration that's going on.
Oh, okay, I see.
In those farther out areas where we're mowing less or timing it to avoid the prime pollinator season, we're seeing things like in the spring, you would see the dandelions first. They're up and out now. As we go through the summer into, June, July, August, you're going to see things like butterfly milkweed, which is orange. It's out there on its own. We're not planting it. You're going to see swamp milkweed, common milkweed. Those are pinks. Elecampane a little later in the season. That's a beautiful sunflowery looking thing that's yellow. Joe Pye weed would be a pink. As we get later into the season, when the late forage is really important for pollinators that are preparing to go into winter, you're going to see a variety of different asters. Those are going to be whites and pinks and purples, and then the late goldenrods, which are yellow. And maybe Peter could talk about places where we actually are planting.
So just to bounce off of what you're saying right there. So the mowing and the practice in mowing and when to mow and when not to mow, it allows those plants to continue to grow, is basically
that is
what
correct.
You're saying.
It allows them to get through to fruition. It's doing two things. If monarchs, which are kind of an iconic species, but not the only pollinator, but certainly one that's of concern, that's expected to be listed by the Fish and Wildlife federally later this year as possibly endangered or threatened. They use the milkweed as their obligate plant for depositing their eggs and their caterpillars eating. But all those forage plants, if we can let them stand later in the year, those provide food for many different species of pollinators. You're almost kind of providing two different benefits to them. you're providing kind of like a nursery or bedroom area, and you're also providing a kitchen, so to speak.
One question I have, and this is from reading some of the studies that have come out, because there have been some really great studies that have come out, is how you're able to kind of track that these areas are helping and are being beneficial. And one of them has to do with sound, with audio, and have I forget what they call them, a little there's a name for it, audio moths. Is that what it is? Which I prayed when I read that were like actually looked like moths. They don't. It's just a small little microphone. It's fine. But in my head, they were flying around. It's great. But talk about, how you're able to kind of track those things in different ways, including in a way that I never even would have given a second thought.
This was part of a study that was ongoing. RIT was the institution that bid and was doing that study for us. It was a 5-year study. It ran from 19 through 23. And it was one of the biggest studies of that sort to date. There were 30 paired sites throughout New York State, and it was a site with our traditional mowing and then a site with modified mowing for time of year or for the setback where you only do it once every other year. And that was one of the things they used, Josh, the audio moth. And I can't comment particularly on that and what the results of that were. I think some of that data is still being analyzed. But they used a whole variety of different methods during that study. Sweep netting, when you're out there with a net with a long handle, just sweeping it through the grass for insects. Some bowl type things where the insects will be caught in the bowl. Focal studies where you're just walking along a transect or a straight line and you're noting every insect that you observe along that line in X minutes. It's fascinating the number of methods that they use.
I was gonna say, that sounds like that could be a rough job.
Yeah.
Just everything you're picking up, because it can't be easy, because you're talking about how many different species are there, more are there, less of them, how are they doing. It's got to be a pretty complicated process to be able to track something like this, and probably something that a 5-year study is going to be beneficial, or even more, because this is not something that maybe you'll see the results of immediately. And I think you said it, this is something that this is the long term. This is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes, that study, we did find some benefits, such as increased floral resources being present in the areas where we did the modified type of mowing. We also find some costs in those areas. We found some increased growth of woody vegetation, which is, of course, more difficult for us to mow to keep that area in an early successional. So there's definitely going to be a balance. And, a big part of that is figuring out how can we do things that are beneficial, but within our constraints of time and people and equipment. And I think it's going to kind of be like riding a unicycle. You're always looking for balance and always kind of adjusting a little bit.
And we were talking earlier before today that, that RIT study, that there are probably going to be follow-up studies that are going to continue to look at this, because, the answers, we don't have the answers for everything yet, but it's all just kind of trying to find those best practices to start to put into place.
Right. Is this more of just this is a process, right? Learning as you're going, pretty much.
Absolutely. I mean, all of life is a process of learning as we go, right?
I like that. That's good. Yep. One of the things I found interesting was reading through a pollinator protection plan that was put together, which, interestingly enough, as I'm looking at it, agency contacts Peter Dunleavy, RLA, and Mary Ellen Papin. Interesting. It's right here. It's like no big deal. They're right here. But one of the things I found super interesting was it's talking about a Region 1 working in, which is the capital region, working in partnership with Greene County Soil and the Water Conservation District in Greene County to establish a pollinator garden on Route 23 in the town of Jewett. And I think my favorite part of it, the effort resulted from an observation in the area of a Native American bumblebee by an off-duty New York State employee with a passion for bees. This is these are passion projects. I mean, things like this, like kind of what made me think of that. This just doesn't happen, right? These are things that people care deeply about in order to start to make those changes.
And that is a perfect example of citizen science, which is what we'd call, and we engage them. And when you find something that galvanizes people, like I found a native bumblebee that hasn't been seen around here, it's like a lightning rod that draws people of all walks of life, from our own agency, from other agencies together, and communities to And that happened with the Seneca Park Zoo, I think, too.
We did partner with them for some planting beds that we put at 2 rest areas on 390. That was interesting. Even as we were planting those that day, people were asking questions as they used the rest area. And the folks that maintain those rest areas, like on the weekends and stuff, when I'm down there and stop, how's it going? They say that they get questions from the public all the time. What are these species? We made some materials so that they could better answer those questions as people ask. So I think this is kind of a force multiplier. We put those in jointly with the zoo, and then our Livingston County forces, actually a year or two ago, they expanded them and doubled them in size. But this breeds interest from the public, which gets people doing this in their own yards at home. And all these little bits add up.
And it gets people talking about it. And they were probably somewhat surprised maybe that DOT had something to do with this as well.
Yes.
I would imagine. Bouncing off of Josh's remarks about this being a passion project, this runs deep within both of you, and I'm sure within your office. For you, you're expressing this, Mary Ellen, through your love of bees and working with them. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And you brought us a special gift today, some of your honey. So talk about how you're actually expressing this in your daily life.
Anya, I can't call that my honey.
That's right.
That's honey.
Honey.
I'm just a small hobbyist weekend beekeeper. And I have a couple of hives. I have some access to a little bit of land in Allegheny County, and I have a couple of hives down there. And it is fascinating to watch them. It's kind of just an interesting pet project. But I can't take credit for that. I'm just the conveyor. They make it, I put it in bottles, and I bring it to you.
And there's actually a number of people here at DOT who do that. In different offices. We had Rob Fitch on with us. One of our first episodes. He has bees.
Assistant Commissioner of Operations Pat
Barnes has. I mean, there's a lot of people who do that, and I think it's a little daunting to think about getting bees, but in reality, it's like you said. I mean, you're looking over them and checking on them, but they'll do their own thing. Now, I did want to ask, and not everyone has the ability or the land or the wherewithal to be an apiarist, apiarist. I'm gonna have to look that up. Anyway, have bees. Beekeeper.
We'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
Google that.
Not everyone can have bees, but I did want to ask, from your perspectives, what can people do? What can everyday people do to help this as well? On a personal standpoint.
Well, one thing I wanted to say was, in addition to the list of all the luminaries that you mentioned that had bees, we also have a landscape architect who's retired from here, but he had hives downtown Albany on Delaware Avenue. And it's very possible, because if you know how to control the bees, they're not going to attack everybody. They're interested in doing their thing. And he had it in a fairly urban setting, just a little room around him, just a little driveway and a parking garage, and he was able to grow them, the bees. But anybody can stop mowing right now. And in addition to that, you can get some wildflower seeds and you can grow them in a small patch the size of this table. Why not? You can get some milkweed and grow it and see if you get monarchs. You will. I've seen them because I've done it in my lot in Troy. And at Earth Day, we had one of our environmental specialists is a farmer, and he created a native seed mix that he put together. We put it into packets. We gave out free packets of native seed on Earth Day to all of the staff. And we said, plant a little patch. This will get you something like 100 square feet. If you can, plant it up. Everybody can do it.
That's great advice. And easy to do.
Yeah, and less mowing.
And like what you said, Mary Ellen, it's the little things, because if everyone does it, it's not little anymore. It makes that big difference. And you talked about how unfortunately the monarch butterfly may be listed sooner rather than later, but we can do our part to make sure that it doesn't. Just like DOT is doing its part to try to make sure that's not the case.
One thing I would say though is that a lot of these things our question of management, we call it landscape stewardship. We have a landscape stewardship policy. And it's just a matter of planning and thought and coordination. It's not necessarily an expensive investment. In fact, we're finding out that we're going to save money by altered mowing practices over time, especially if something like the monarch gets listed, and we would have to invest a lot of time in coordination. But if we do these conservation measures, we can actually save money, and it's not necessarily a big investment.
Any last kind of thoughts that you want to throw out there?
I guess I'd like to say I appreciate how accepting a lot of the folks that we've been working with, especially the folks in maintenance and that are actually on the ground and doing this work, how accepting many of them have been of these ideas. This is a big lift. It's going to take a lot of people, and that's heartening. I was at a spring meeting last summer out in the Rochester region, and it was really one of those things that kind of made you feel really good when you leave. But one of our newer mowers had come up to me and he said, I know we're working on pollinators and this and that, but I was told last week to mow through this patch. You know, it was a line of reference markers. And I did that, and I mowed down so much milkweed, and it just made me feel not right when I was doing it. And that's something that I wouldn't have heard 10 or 20 years ago. It just wouldn't have happened. And it was so refreshing. And I said, let's not look at that as something that was bad. I said, you've identified an area which would be a good area for us to think about using for a conservation measure. So that's progress.
That's definitely progress. And as Josh just said, a shift in thinking and a shift in where we want to go.
Yes.
Well, I do want to mention a couple more people who were also very helpful in planning and getting this episode together. That's Alex von Bieberstein and Sarah Lazzazzaro. Both have also been extremely helpful in helping getting us information and studies for today. And I know you two both work with them, and they are integral to this plan as well. But I cannot thank you both enough for coming in and taking some time to chat with us and just talk about your backgrounds, your expertise, and what you're doing for this extremely important important topic. Pollinator Week coming up in June, but it's something that year round needs to be kept in mind, and something that it appears like with the help of both of you and your offices is something that is being taken into consideration, and it's a good thing. It's a great thing. Well, Anya, another one in the books. Fascinating one. I like this one a lot.
Oh, yeah, this was really good. And we got some wonderful honey out of it. Thank you, Mary Ellen, for the wonderful honey.
Tremendous. So thank you to everyone who is tuning in to the DOTPOD. Always appreciate the listeners, especially the new listeners coming on in. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day to tune in to our humble little show. You can reach out to us. Podcast at dot.ny.gov. That's the easiest way in which to do it. That's podcast at dot.ny.gov. So thanks again for tuning in. We will be back right here on the DOT BOD.